The US president stands at his presidential podium, giving what could possibly be the speech of his career to a massive crowd of assembled reporters and supporters. It's a rousing speech, one that would touch the hearts of millions and inspire generations to come. But not everyone was here just to listen. Out in the crowd, a man in a long coat is hiding a revolver in his pocket. He intends on accomplishing something that hasn't been done successfully since the death of John F. Kennedy, the assassination of a president. He waits as the speech drones on. All eyes are on the president. Then he chooses his moment and begins to push through the crowd in front of him. He wants a clear shot. When he's at the front of the crowd, he pulls his weapon out of his coat, draws a bead on the man behind the podium, and the air is suddenly filled with shocked and terrifying gasps. A gunshot rings out, but it isn't from the would-be assassin's gun. An eagle-eyed Secret Service agent had noticed what was going on from the start. He saw the telltale signs, the shiftiness, the sudden panic, the man reaching into his coat. He neutralized the threat with one well-placed shot from his standard-issue Glock 19 9mm pistol, a 2019 replacement for the Sig Sauer that's been the Secret Service mainstay since 1998. Agents already positioned among the crowd apprehend the injured suspect, while others escort the president off the stage and into a secure location. Certainly a scary situation for all involved, but thanks to the hard work and expertise of the Secret Service, there was no fatalities. The US president is one of the most powerful global political positions. Due to America's prominence on the world stage, the US president is sometimes even nicknamed the leader of the free world. A presidential order can save lives or start wars, and a single presidential tweet can collapse a stock market. Because of the United States' power, its partisan division, and long history of questionable foreign policy decisions, you don't become the president without making a lot of enemies, some of which would really like to see you compromised, captured, held hostage, or even worse, killed. It's the sworn duty of the Secret Service to protect the US president and those around him at any cost, up to and including their own lives. And as it turns out, the Secret Service have been around for an incredibly long time, with over 150 years of history at their backs. But a lot has changed in the last century and a half, and no organization can stick around that long unless it changes with the times. That's what we're looking at today, the evolution of the Secret Service, an exploration into what made them the iconic group they are today. Our tale begins all the way back in 1865. It was April 14th, a mere few days after the conclusion of the Civil War, and President Lincoln was performing one of his final official acts as president before his own assassination by John Wilkes Booth later that very night. He signed the decree that would bring the first Secret Service into existence. You might be thinking, pretty ironic that he'd create the Secret Service and then be assassinated immediately afterwards, but protecting the president wasn't actually the Secret Service's primary directive. You see, in the post-Civil War era, the United States had some big problems. Among these was rampant counterfeiting. These days, bills are built with a number of complex systems in mind to prevent counterfeiting. But back in those days, no such technology existed. As a result, it became popular and a profitable crime. By the end of the Civil War, it's estimated that 1/3 to even half of the currency in circulation in the US was counterfeit, and it was becoming a major threat to the financial stability of the country. These bands of self-interested criminals were coming closer to ruining the Union than even the Confederacy itself. The government needed a new task force, specifically to deal with the counterfeiting threat, and so the Secret Service was born, at first a subsidiary to the Treasury Department. They proved to be effective at this task, and as a result, 2 years later in 1867, they had their purview expanded to chase down anyone who perpetrated fraud against the United States government. But of course, their power and reach was still somewhat limited in the 1800s. Congress was terrified of the looming possibility of centralization, and they wanted to give power to the states rather than consolidating it to the federal government. But of course, things couldn't stay that way forever. While the Secret Service was making life harder for counterfeiters and fraudsters, in 1881 tragedy struck again, and President James A. Garfield was assassinated. This was the second US presidential assassination in 20 years, and it was starting to make the country look bad. Suddenly, Congress started drafting some informal measures on tightening presidential security and devoting a branch of law enforcement specifically to protect the president. But this was still considered a much more part-time affair than a permanent shift for the Secret Service. There were still plenty of fake bills to hunt down. In 1894, the Secret Service began the off-and-on duty of protecting the then-President Grover Cleveland, and they were effective in thwarting any attempts on his life. It was during this period that the Secret Service built up their reputation for being avid protectors of the highest seat of federal power, and this would serve them well with what would happen not long after, the assassination of President Cleveland's successor, William McKinley, in 1901. While McKinley's murder at the hands of assassin Lon Cholgus was the inciting incident, The factors that led up to this change had been brewing for around 30 years at this point. First of all, the United States had evolved from a newly independent country to a survivor of civil war to a major imperial power on the world stage. They had appearances to keep up, and showing weakness while in such a position of power could be incredibly dangerous. 3 presidents assassinated in a 36-year period was not a good look for the US. It screamed disorder, incompetence, and worst of all, chaos. Speaking of chaos, the other major factor in the Secret Service becoming a centralized law enforcement agency was the rise in anarchist attacks on the Union since 1870. The Chicago Haymarket Riot in 1886 was a particularly sobering reminder, and fears of violent insurgency led to many members of the public and the government feeling unsafe. Something clearly needed to be done, and the US seemed to be facing a national security threat that was greater than the desire for state sovereignty. In the words of McKinley's iconic successor Theodore Roosevelt, when compared with the suppression of anarchy, every other question sinks into insignificance. Coupled with the growing fear of foreign threats, this was finally enough to make Congress enshrine the Secret Service with the duty of permanent presidential protection. President Roosevelt was also a strong believer in centralization, coming from the perspective that more could be achieved with a truly united America, and this served as a major push behind the Secret Service's new responsibilities. However, despite recognizing the importance of the Secret Service as an institution, Roosevelt wasn't actually a huge fan of them on a personal level. Roosevelt was once quoted as saying that the Secret Service was a very small but very necessary thorn in the flesh, an archaic term for an inconvenience. This is likely because Roosevelt was pretty much the perfect example of a rugged, manly outdoorsman and probably frowned on the idea of needing protection. In fact, Roosevelt was once shot during a speech by an attempted assassin and yet persevered, finishing the speech before seeking medical attention. But this wasn't the end of the Secret Service's evolution as an organization. There are a few key dates in the 20th century that show important changes. In 1930, the Secret Service took over the White House police force, and 7 years later, they took over the Treasury police force. This all makes sense, seeing as when you want to run a tight ship and prevent everything from espionage to assassination, it's beneficial to keep everything under the control of a single centralized group. The Secret Service would later run into a predicament with President John F. Kennedy. Much like Roosevelt, Kennedy didn't like the idea of having the Secret Service surrounding him constantly. Their cautious security protocols would keep him boxed in and prevent him from cultivating his man of the people image. Kennedy liked to shake hands and wave to his citizens from topless convertibles and motorcades, courses of action that the Secret Service advised against. Of course, the difference of opinion would later have fatal results, with the assassination of President Kennedy in Dallas in 1963. Nearly a decade later, in 1971, the Secret Service swore its first 5 female agents. After the 9/11 attacks of 2001 and the passing of the controversial Patriot Act, the Secret Service was also tasked with managing a national network of electronic crimes task forces in order to clamp down on perceived cyber threats to U.S. national security. In 2003, the parent department of the Secret Service also shifted. They now worked under the Department of Homeland Security rather than the Treasury Department. In 2013, President Obama, himself a historic figure as the first black U.S. president, made history by appointing Julia Pearson, the first female head of the Secret Service. However, this appointment was sadly short-lived. In 2014, there were a number of severe presidential security breaches, including one armed man climbing over the White House fence and breaching the executive mansion. This led to Julia Pearson resigning from her position. Views on the Secret Service can be complex. While they have undeniably been useful in thwarting assassination attempts, including a plot to murder President Obama, they've had some vocal critics in their time. Iconic World War II war hero General Patton described them as a bunch of cheap detectives always smelling of drink. The Secret Service themselves have even at times gone by the unflattering self-given nickname, babysitters with guns. But given that there's only been one successful presidential assassination since they started doing their work compared to 3 before, it's safe to say that they're doing at least something right. So we've already discussed how the Secret Service went from counterfeiting cops to presidential protectors, but who exactly does their protection mandate cover? The president and vice president are obvious top priorities, but they also cover their immediate families, former presidents, spouses, and minor children under the age of 16, major presidential and vice presidential candidates and their spouses, and foreign heads of state and their spouses while they're visiting the US. But it doesn't stop there. The Secret Service are also responsible for protecting so-called national security events, typically extremely high-profile events that would be attractive targets to insurgents looking to make a violent point to a large audience. One prominent example is the Super Bowl, one of the most popular United States sporting events. In these cases, the Secret Service will be given full control over the security of the event and coordinate with local law enforcement to ensure safety for all involved. And there you have it, the 150-year journey of the Secret Service. Next time you see one of these silent suit-wearing bodyguards complete with shades, sidearms, and earpieces, you'll know more about them than you ever did before. And in case you were wondering, despite their evolution, they still stay true to their roots even today. The Secret Service collaborates with 46 financial crimes task forces, and they're still the nation's leading law enforcement agency in the fight against counterfeiting. After all, you gotta respect the classics. Now, check out How Do They Actually Print Counterfeit Money and Day in the Life of a Secret Service Agent to uncover some secrets of your own.